Familiar with the Mark? How many people have been reading the Mark recently since it's launched? Come on. So you're all going to go home tonight and check out themarknews.com because it's a new nonpartisan online forum that features articles written by Canadian thinkers and doers. The great Canadian thinkers and doers, it seemed a bit immodest, and from all professional disciplines in Canada and abroad. It's a magazine that aims to promote Canadian ideas and the thinkers behind them. So I thought it made sense to conclude this series of talks by hearing about what it's like at the vanguard of a new publishing model in Canada that's trying to connect a whole bunch of new voices. We're going to talk for the next half hour or so, and then we're going to want to hear from you, so have your questions ready, and Jordan will try and supply some good answers. I think the best way to start is simply with some numbers. Jordan, tell us who's reading, who's writing, and how all of this got started.
Okay, so thanks for the introduction. As you said, Mark is a new online forum for news and opinion.
Yeah.
And the opinion part, which I oversee, is essentially a platform for outstanding Canadians working in all fields to write about current events in the areas in which they're at. And we have now a roster of about 450 of these experts. And we're publishing now about 6 op-eds a day about current events. Our readership, our target audience are smart, engaged Canadians between 20 and 40. In terms of the numbers of readers, there's no real meaningful average because our traffic fluctuates so drastically from day to day. But we're seeing a slow but steady overall build and moments of huge spikes. We were featured in the Globe a few weeks ago, and we saw a big traffic spike after that. We published an essay by Melissa Oftemar, the former bassist of Hole, about her experience with swine flu. She wrote a diary about having swine flu, and that was picked up by newspapers across Canada and the US, and we saw a big spike of traffic then. Bob Ray wrote an essay for us about the American healthcare law, and that was picked up in the Atlantic Monthly, and again we saw a spike there.
I want to talk more about the relationship between you as an editor and these correspondents and thinkers who are contributing these pieces. But before that, just take us back even further to where the idea for the Mark came from. What was the need that you perceived that you're trying to fill?
It wasn't my idea. I'd like to take credit for it, but it wasn't. The Mark was founded by Jeff Andrews, our CEO. He was doing a Master's in Public Administration at Harvard. And he was in Michael Ignatieff's class. And when Ignatieff when Ignatieff came back to Canada to run for the Liberal leadership in 2006, Jeff came with him and worked on his policy team. And that was his team, Iggy's team, was the inspiration for the Mark. In that Jeff saw all these young, outstanding Canadians, really engaged, really interested in politics, what he thought were great ideas, and he wanted Canadians to have access to the conversations that they were having. And he thought, even if some of these people can publish an op-ed in the Globe and Mail, they can do so maybe once, twice in a year. He wanted to create a forum where outstanding Canadians could be conversing all the time, whenever they were moved to do so, and for Canadians to get the benefit of the great thinking that's coming out of this country. So yeah, that was the genesis.
That's the impetus there, but there are a whole bunch of steps to then actually launching the website.
So after Jeff came up with the idea, he partnered with Ali Rana, who's now our COO. He was vice president of marketing and strategy for the Globe and Mail. And the two of them worked just as a duo for about a year on the Mark. Then they brought in Josh Nelman as the editor, who's here tonight, and he worked with them for a few months, and then I came on board, and Claire Ward, who's also here, as the news editor, and we both came on board relatively recently, just before the May launch.
Right. The site's in beta now. It's one of the first things you remark on when you go to the website. You see the masthead, it says beta.
Yeah.
What's beta all about, and what does the future of the Mark look like? What's the difference between beta and wherever it is you're going, I guess?
Yeah, that's a hard question to answer. We may be in beta for a very, very long time. We're not sure what the site is going to look like. There are things that we want to do. We want to do a better job of fostering and hosting conversations, being a more dynamic site. We want to do a better job of being of showcasing audio and video, being platform agnostic, those are some broad ideas. There are a lot of ambitions that we have, and we're not exactly sure what the road is to getting there. But the first step is that we're going to be launching a redesign in the next few weeks and doing a big relaunch, doing publicity. So far we've done zero publicity. We haven't sent out an email to the press saying that we exist yet. So that's all going to happen in mid-September.
There isn't a typical day with traffic, but approximately how many people are reading this?
There's really no meaningful average. Several thousand people.
Right. That's great. And how many articles have you put up now? You said you have 450. This is a lot of content, and not so many people having to process all these words.
No. I've edited personally most of the essays that are on the site. There are nearly 500 essays now on the site.
With 6 of them going up a day.
Yeah, not bad.
Okay. So where do they come from? People have an idea, or you've recruited this person. I mean, how do you then try and manage a great talent pool? So you're trying to be topical, I'm sure, as well. You're trying to plant commentary that sort of coincides with what's happening in current affairs.
It's definitely a strategic challenge. We're not paying our writers, and they write because generally there's something in it for them.
Yeah.
At the same time, we're not publishing advertorials, but there is a tendency in some of our contributors' parts to want to write promotional material for whatever it is that they're doing. So the pieces, we're now trying to find the right balance between taking pieces that just naturally bubble out of the community and turning them into something interesting to a general audience, and soliciting material from contributors who we think would see some value for themselves in writing and in engaging seriously with a topical subject.
Right. Some surprise stories that have come your way that, I mean, the funny thing is you actually are divesting a lot of responsibility as an editor to come up with these stories. You don't have a kind of bullpen of writers, in-house working with you. Stuff comes out of the ether. So have there been some surprises? Surprise hits?
Definitely. One was the Melissa Oftemar essay. We were talking to Melissa Oftemar as we talked to all our potential contributors, just sort of giving her the background of the site, asking her when she might be willing to contribute, what sort of subjects she might want to contribute on. And she said, well, I can't do anything for a while because I have swan flu, which was as good an excuse as we heard up to that point. And so Doug Sorrow, one of our interns who's here, said, as Jeff was on the phone with her, have her write a diary about it. And so that's how that piece came about. But we've had a few great surprises in terms of sort of unknown, unknown to the general public, professionals. Darren Thorne is a human rights lawyer who is, until very recently, living in Rome. And his commentary is as good as anything out there on human rights issues. Very impassioned, very values-based, very incisive, and often hilarious. Amy Langstaff is just a Toronto-based freelance writer who I don't think was writing much popular stuff, and she writes sort of popular psychology articles that are great. We get contributions occasionally from Laura Calder, who is a French chef on the Food Net, who has a master's from LSE, from the London School of Economics. And she writes sort of great advice columns, really top-notch, like how to find a man based on his dinner party manners, kinds of essays, but they're really, really engaging and good. Yeah, so there have been a lot of surprises.
So having worked at the Chronicle-Telegraph, then, and in traditional print journalism, where you're thinking about op-eds and commentaries there as well, what are the biggest differences then for you as an editor between those two platforms? You don't have the constraints of length, that's one thing, I guess.
We don't have the constraints of length in a way, though. We try and keep our pieces under 700 words. We try to keep them short because we think that people don't want to read very long articles on the internet. There are a few differences. I mean, the biggest difference, maybe from my point of view, is what you said, that unlike at the Chronicle-Telegraph, not that we necessarily always have the best roster of commentators, but
you can say that now.
Yeah, there I could say, write about this, and it was their job to do so. Now I can't do that. I really have to rely on the goodwill and cooperativeness of our roster. In terms of the style of writing, I think there's a lot of overlap between what we do and what, say, is published in the op-ed section of the Globe. I think that the essays that you see on our site could very well appear in the Globe. I mean, there are certain differences that come from being on the internet. So our writing is more dense. We use links instead of explication to provide context. But so far, the tools that we use are very similar to traditional media.
One of the things that I think probably bedevils most media platforms, and certainly the globemail.com, is the comment section. And you're talking about wanting to make the mark a center place for good conversation. Do you have any thoughts on how to do it? Because often getting into the comment section of any paper or magazine online is can be a pretty nasty place to visit. Or at least it doesn't feel like a particularly constructive conversation.
No, that's true.
Is that fair?
Definitely, and that's something we've thought a lot about.
Yeah.
And we have a few strategies for doing it. The first is that we don't allow any anonymous comments on our site. All commenters have to put their real name and an email address, and soon they'll have to put their job as well, whatever their profession is. So that's a way of encouraging transparent, constructive conversations. Another thing that I think you can do, which we're not doing yet, but which we hope to eventually do, is once you have a certain volume of comments, as the loading on or cbc.ca, it's very hard to pull out what is interesting among all the dribble. And one way to do that is to sort of crowdsource the editorial work that goes into that. So allowing readers to vote up and down comments and there are structural ways that you can help curate the conversation.
What do you think the limits are of crowdsourcing? We were talking outside earlier and saw today this sort of maxim that aggregation is cheap but curation is costly. And yet when you're looking at the volume of comments, you're saying, well, we can crowdsource this and people can vote it up and down. What do you need an editor for?
Well, I think that...
'Cause you're expensive by comparison.
Yeah, sort of. I think that the job, that my job is, in some ways it's very similar to the job of an editor at the Globe or the Doers, and in some ways it's very different. I have to ask the same kinds of questions. Is a particular story meaningful if we give good information on it, if we explain well why our readers should care about it, will they? And as I said, a lot of the, and if we answer those questions well, then what's our content taken together gives a sort of picture of what it is to be alive in Canada now, or alive in the world, or whatever the scope is of your publication. And a lot of the tools that we use, as I said, to answer those kinds of questions are the same as the tools that the Globe uses. So the content on our homepage is overall very similar to the content in those kinds of publications. But this is a very roundabout answer to your question. I'll get to it eventually. But there's another kind of content that online sources can create that traditional media can't because of spatial and temporal restrictions. So, and what I'm talking about here is the sort of mass niche content. The long tail, the idea that you can create tons of very specific content that only a handful of readers will ever see, but that by doing that, you can create an audience as large as sources that produce only content that is supposed to have mass appeal. We know that this works from a marketing perspective, but the editorial challenge that it poses is, how do you incorporate all of that diverse niche content into an overarching editorial vision? How does all of that content go to answer the big questions that we have to answer and the Globe has to answer? And I think that it can, if done well. And I think a good example is CBC.ca's coverage of the last federal election, Canada Votes. Part of that feature was a list of all 308 electoral ridings and profiles of all the candidates in those ridings, and I think summaries of the issues at play in those ridings, and a forum where commenters could weigh in on the issues at play. Now, from the perspective of traditional media, this is terrible content. It's boring. It's highly repetitive. It violates the principle that most of your content should be interesting to most of your readers.
Seems like a fair principle.
Violates the principle.
I'm not sure that it is.
Right.
Because I think it actually works on several levels. So definitely most of it isn't interesting to the vast majority of the readers. But most of the readers will immediately understand and appreciate the whole, which can be presented clearly online as a reference essentially. Here is a picture of the whole Canadian democracy. Now, you're probably not interested in every part of that, but you're probably glad that you have the resource. You probably can't get that kind of coverage, that kind of information on easily in one place on your riding anywhere else, or certainly on your riding and 10 battlegrounds. And it's sort of, and at the same time, for each element of it is interesting to some group of people, or some group of friends. It's sort of like the phone book. Like we're all glad that the phone book exists. None of us read it all the way through. But the fact that we don't read it all the way through is not seen as an editorial failing of the phone book. And in fact, individual pieces of information in the phone book are extremely useful to
The right time and place.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And if we didn't have it, that would be a huge loss.
Although I think I've thrown out the last 3 phone books that have come to my door too.
Yeah, online phone books are good.
Listen, I mean, this has been a weird summer too, because it seems like every weekend you open a Saturday paper and it's telling you that this may be the last Saturday paper you ever read. And we're hearing about all the, first it was small American towns, and now it's mid-sized American towns, and now it's going to be big American cities that are losing their very august, very respected newspapers. How do you feel when you read these articles? Do you go, oh, this is good for me? Do you say, ooh, this is bad for all of us? What does it feel like to be in the new media end of journalism, watching ostensibly the death of old media?
Are you calling me a murderer?
I've asked you to justify your existence as an editor, and now this, so yeah, go for it.
No, I mean, I think that if I really worried about the possibility that professional journalism, the high quality professional journalism that I have grown up loving and that's made me want to do the profession that I do would disappear, then I might feel, well, I would certainly feel depressed and I might feel guilty. But I don't think that that's true.
You don't think it's disappearing?
Well, I think it's changing, and it's going to be, there are going to be less journalists.
Okay.
But there still will be professional journalism, I think. And I think that new technologies necessarily change economies, but that new technologies and old technologies coexist all the time. And
who do you admire most then in this space? I mean, we've actually seen the Tyee win the Edward R. Murrow Award, which is fantastic. It's a real justification for everything that David Beers has been trying to do there for the past 6 or 7 years. Comment is free, funded by the Guardian Trust. It's really changed the way that I think that organization thinks about opinion pieces and tries to engage with a wider audience. It's certainly made it very popular in America. We've seen some of these declining newspapers turn themselves into web-based properties. Who gets it out there, and who do you kind of, look at and think that's pretty cool?
Well, I admire all of the sources that you named. I think that while the Huffington Post has its limitations, certainly it's definitely a model for the mark. There are some differences, but the idea of sort of making a living community of op-ed writers came from Huffington Post, and I think that's a great idea. Who was it? We sort of went over this, and neither of us was sure. Who was it that did the crowdsourcing experiment with the MP's expenses?
We're trying to figure it was either the Guardian or the Telegraph.
It was the Guardian.
Telegraph broke it, and the Guardian did the receipts online.
Yeah, and the Guardian is great overall. I think that project was hugely insightful in terms of how crowdsourcing can be used well. I never quite answered your question about how crowdsourcing can be used well, and I think that the Guardian. I don't know if everyone here knows what they did, but basically they uploaded all of the British MPs' receipts, all of the expenses that they've written off, and they asked their readers to go to the MP in their riding, and go through the expenses and highlight anything that looked strange. And then the Guardian dedicated reporters to investigating these anomalies, and they found the craziest stuff. They found like $1 million pens and $1 billion dinners.
You just imagine like 10,000 British grannies with their eyeglasses on.
I was waiting for crowdsourcing. And I think that is a great idea. Now, I mean, it was used as sort of a gotcha accountability obsessed end, and I think that that it could be that you could use that insight, and I think that insight will be used to much loftier ends. I think that the Canada votes model, I think that you could significantly improve what was already a great model by using crowdsourcing to, and this could be applied. This could be applied not just in politics, but in any field. You can use this sort of mass niche content to create these resource works, to create these resources, and then you can use readers to pull out the most interesting elements.
Well, it looks like we'll maybe soon get a chance to see how the Mark manages to cover a federal election. Should we go to the polls this autumn? I have just one final question I want to ask, and then we'll do a bit of crowdsourcing ourselves and get a few questions in. But that's, I mean, there are a number of young journalists in the room here who may or may not have been to J school. Does it make sense to go to J school these days? And would you encourage anyone to study journalism right now? The industry is really in flux.
I studied formal logic at the university. I would encourage all journalists to do that. Because you're guaranteed, either you're a logician or you're a journalist. It's guaranteed work. I don't know. I mean, I think that I'm not sure I ever would have encouraged people to go to journalism school. It was definitely, it was and probably still is definitely a good way to network and to get your foot in the door. But in terms of what you learn, I think that the best journalists, the best commentators, and those will be in much higher demand once journalism finally changes for good. They are people with a wide breadth of knowledge and of interest, and not necessarily people who grasp the technical side of journalism.
Okay. Great. Thank you. Why don't we take a couple of questions? Yeah.
Yeah.
Right there.
When you were asking about which sites you admire, what do you think of Salon? Do you see that as a sort of hybrid?
I'm not a big reader of Salon, so I don't feel really comfortable talking about it.
I mean, they're online and they're not thousands of folks, so they have really fun.
Yeah.
Others? Yeah.
Just as like a first impulse gut reaction answer, how would you answer why is old media struggling?
Could you repeat the question?
Why is old media struggling? Gut answer.
Yeah, your first impulse. Like
I
everyone.
can't think about it.
No, you can't
If I
think
take
about
it too
it,
long.
but like.
Okay, next question. think it's because the internet has changed what journalism can do, and it's changed what kinds of information people can get for free and how they can get it, and so it's made redundant a lot of the things that old media do, or a lot of the things, but certainly not all of the things. And old media has not been good at adapting. It hasn't been good at figuring out how to use the internet.
Well, part of it's surely because it's saddled by these things called salaries,
Yeah.
Exactly.
which you're not saddled by. The economics of it are totally different.
Exactly.
Like, that's what I'm wondering, you know,
Yeah.
like, I've been working for the past year in a very large newspaper, and I realized that, like, probably about, I don't know, like 15%, less than 15% of the actual manpower is put towards the actual website, like curating the website. I think there's like 12 people who do the website. And then there's like 350 people who do the print version. And then the print version is massively expensive to produce, right? And it has this constant deadline. And I'm trying to figure out, is it the fact that revenue is so hard, like alternate revenue streams are so hard to come by through the internet because everything's free?
Yeah.
Or is it because the means of production that we've been relying on for the past, since the printing press, is just outrageously expensive compared to the other kinds of ways you can disseminate information now? Like, is it an expense issue or is it a revenue issue?
How
You know what I
important
mean?
is
That's
it?
what I don't.
How
I can't
important
figure out.
is it for you to be free? I mean, Murdoch is threatening to lock up all his websites and so on. Are you going to stay free?
I think yes, definitely.
Yes.
But I don't know how important it is for us to stay free. I guess we'll find out once Murdoch logs up all his papers. I mean, no one knows, but probably very important.
Well, that brings me to another question. What is your business model, and how do you see yourselves being sustainable? You have to pay some salaries.
Yeah, right now we're funded by private investors, and certainly the business model has something to do with advertising, something to do with events, something to do with conferences, but what exactly it is, we're not sure. Right now, basically, we have inspiration, and we're trying to create the best product that we can, and we are betting on ourselves to create something that someone is going to be willing to pay us for.
So would it be micropayments or membership, or you don't know?
Neither
No.
of those, probably.
Yeah, Alex, you guys are working to be the vanguard of the new media in Canada, and you've given us a pretty rosy picture of what that is. I'm wondering what you think is the biggest threat to democracy or the Canadian public from new media. Is it increasing fragmentation? Is it digital divide? Is it the big sort of big money spending of the old media system? You know, war reportage and investigative journalism. That those are going to fall apart, or is it something else?
I think you gave a bunch of good answers. I think it's all of those things. I think that that the most important parts of traditional media will last, and they will exist to do the job that they're doing now. I think that there is some risk that there's just a degradation of the quality of discourse. But I believe that sources like the MARC will emerge that will give people a place to go online, that capitalizes on all of the benefits that online offers, that provides high-level discourse and maybe even higher level, new ways of talking about democracy.
Is he asking the threat of new media towards democracy?
Yeah.
Why would you say that why was the question formulated as new media being threatening to democracy?
I think that there are potential threats. You know, the more media ends up fragmenting, right, into all of these different very small spaces that each of us exist because we're interested in it, but we don't have a space to share a discussion because we're not all looking at the same thing. I think as it moves towards,
But how's
the
it
digital era, there are people who have difficulty having access to those things because of social inequalities or educational divides. I think also some of the work that old journalism does, war reporting and investigative journalism, are often require a lot of funds. And all of those things, they're harder to finance when you're coming from small operations like the Huffington Post or the Mark, and so those may fall out of place if all of these old media end up not having a marketplace. So I think that there are, there's wonderful things coming out of new media, and I think I agree with a lot of them. I'm always interested in seeing the other side.
I just think it's interesting because it's like one of the biggest complaints that have happened since for the past 50 years is the homogenization of mass media, right? Like with corporations homogenizing and having mergers and all that stuff and having only a certain number of owners for given media outlets when it comes to the very top. So I would, my first impulse when I think of new media is I think that that's a way to circumvent that, right? Which is a good thing. And you do get fragmenting and stuff, but it's totally limitless. You can go and find it. They might be in smaller outlets, but there's no limit to being able to find them because it's all out there on the internet. You know what I mean?
So I'm not an expert on this, but I think people like Cass Sunstein have written specifically about sort of the dangers of echo chambers and people, because there's this huge spread gathering in communities that don't talk to one another.
Yeah.
And so, I think that's
true.
Sort of standard lines. Whether it's true.
Jeff?
Jordan, how important is it to you when you take an essay live that it generates response, extensive discussion, because of the nature of the essay? Is that an important part of you making a decision to put something, post something?
We definitely hope for that, and we try and encourage that in various ways, and I think we're going to do a better job in the future of encouraging response and conversation to our essays. Right now, as long as an essay is coherent, relatively well argued, we publish it. We present. We don't necessarily feature it on the homepage, but the value that we offer our contributors is a platform. This is a place that they can use to communicate with the public, and so we don't do a lot of projecting.
Robert?
In terms of resources, what kind of fact-checking legal team do you have? We've seen internet anonymity disappear in the last week or so in the Google lawsuit. So I'm just curious about what kind of resources you put into making sure that somebody doesn't see your runoff.
Well, we don't have fact checkers, and we tell our contributors that the facts are their responsibility, and we try and communicate to our readers that the facts are the author's responsibility, that we don't endorse their positions. We're not, that's another point about the Mark, and it's something that differentiates us from the Huffington Post, is that we're not ideologically anchored in any way. We actively pursue a diversity of opinions from conflicting opinions. I'm there to nix anything that I think is libelous, and we have to work this on.
Have you had to print any retractions or amend articles yet? Where it just became clear that something was just totally off? It happens, New York Times does this weekly, right?
Not us, though.
But not you. That's because, okay.
In that way, we're much better than
I, for one, am relieved. Sure.
Quick question. Was that what you were talking about, the Huffington Post, in terms of its limitations? The fact that it's very pointed in its editorial?
Yeah, I think that's one of them. We're trying to go against the current trend in media that, or the assumption that most sources have that people want to read just what they agree with. We want to be a source that challenges our readers to question their beliefs and to perfect their ideas through seeing the challenges. Other limitations of Huffington Post, I would say, are its occasional crassness. We don't actively pursue celebrities above, say, policy goals. We're trying to get a good balance, and we have a lot more professors than we have actives right now.
And yet, I mean, Jordan, the story that you put forward as your greatest success, or the one that's been most provocative, of course, is the singer on the whole, writing about swine flu.
Right.
Not the numerous wonks who are putting out very earnest and thoughtful commentaries daily on Canadian foreign policy and what we should be doing with guaranteed annual incomes. Yeah. How about that? Yeah.
I'll have to figure out how to find the right balance between those two things. Yeah, I mean, the tension exists. People like celebrity stuff, but I think that there's a lot of potential in what I was talking about before in the long tail, and not just producing content that will be of interest to a mass audience, but of creating a picture through a great depth of content.
So is this really a conduit for this kind of largely academic talent to speak to the Canadian public, or is it an opportunity for that kind of talent to speak to other talented and likewise interested individuals?
Both. I think when they speak in a particularly wonkish way that's inaccessible to Canadians, then it's for other wonks. And when they speak in a way that's accessible to Canadians, it's just a blog op-ed on the mark.
Okay. And can travel.
Yeah.
Other questions? Yeah.
Jordan, how do you protect those ideas that appear on your site in terms of plagiarism and content stealing from other journalists, or seeing what you guys publish in other newspapers without adding to that attribution?
I think we just we use our common sense the best I can do. We if anything looks fishy, we'll investigate. We have rejected a few pieces on the basis of them being factually dubious, but
Has any of your contributors seen their own stuff, like from that they contributed to the mark other places?
We have seen that occasionally, or on a very few occasions, and we've asked that the piece be removed. And I think it was just on one occasion, and that the site immediately removed the piece. So far it hasn't been a very big problem, but it's true that we're publishing a lot of content, and we have very little resources to make sure that.
What's the copyright status of articles on the mark? Is it Creative Commons? Can you just rip, mix, burn it as you like, or do you say it belongs to the author, it belongs to us, or?
It belongs. We retain the right to use it, but so do authors retain the right to use it again in any way they see fit. They can republish it. They can republish on.
Right. Okay. But a reader can't take it and put it on their website. No. Other questions? Yeah.
40 years from now, when you look back, and we get to say, at the very least, the mark accomplished X, what would you want that to be?
I think I'd like the mark to use the potential of the internet to foster a higher level of conversation, and to use that to engage readers in a way that they're not currently engaged.
It seems to me that what you're trying to do is something very important, which is terribly important, which is to provide a free marketplace of ideas. But it also seems to me from almost all your answers that almost all the ideas, and this is not meant to be insulting, will be of the left, of which I am. But I remember very well, I used to take this magazine. And it was wonderful until I realized I agreed with everything it said. Therefore, I stopped taking it. Is there not a danger that, I must admit I haven't read the mark, but my sense is that probably a whole lot of nice lefties with a tiny touch occasionally on the other side.
And that's our selection process of authors, like anything else, is human and imperfect. That's the editorial input that we have. But we do try and bracket out our own political views. Maybe I'm a lefty too.
Of course you're a lefty.
But we do make a conscious effort to bracket out our own political views and to try and represent views across the spectrum.
Are you successful?
I think so. We actually, I mentioned Bob Ray's essay on healthcare, and the day after, we published a response by the Fraser Institute. And
I'm not sure that Bob Ray is a lefty though.
No, fair enough. But the Fraser Institute is definitely not a lefty.
You're right. Okay, you're right.
And they probably regard him as a lefty. So
They probably see him as a commie.
And we actually got a lot of very negative feedback from our readers saying, why are you giving voice to this nonsense, to this baseless right wing?
And what was your answer?
Our answer is that we are a forum for all credible Canadians, and that we seek to represent all points of view, so that our readers and their views are constantly challenged.
Now, let me just push back
See,
a bit.
if I may just make a
Sure,
final
please.
point.
Yeah.
You see, why I ask those follow-up questions is, it seems to me that so much of the internet is us nice lefties. No, wait, I haven't finished. I was about to say, in parenthesis, leaving out tea parties in the States and anything to do with healthcare, damn near anywhere in the world these days. Leaving them aside for the moment, because it is a momentary aberration. The people who do what we do tend to be lefties. And I would hate to see the mark go off, even imperceptibly, into that area where we all agree and everybody's nice to everybody, and there is not proper respect paid to ideas of the right. And they have ideas. I think they're mainly lousy ideas, but they have ideas, and we should consider them, we should hear them, we should be able to consider them.
I totally agree with you, and I think it takes a conscious effort on our part, especially because the majority of our contributors right now, and the majority of the people who you can easily call an expert are academics. And academia is by and large left wing.
Yes.
So we have to make a conscious effort to represent all points of view, and so far I think we've done a fairly good job of doing that. So I will remember what you're saying and be vigilant.
It brings to mind an earlier online experiment in kind of for the commentariat on the left, which was Rabble.ca. Have you learned anything from Judy Revick's experiment with Rabble?
What specifically?
I mean, it's a platform that, in some ways, precedes the mark in creating a space for policy analysts and academics and those affiliated with the left to try and start a critical conversation amongst themselves. And I know they've gone through many iterations, that they've wrestled with some of these issues around commentators and how this becomes a conversation and the role that it can play politically. I mean, given the fact that your genesis had something to do with the crew around Ignatieff, I'm not suggesting that that would then influence the editorial position now, but it strikes me that there are some interests here. And you know, have you taken any pages? Have you learned from
we're not robots, and we have political views, and we don't agree with every essay that we publish. But again, it's a conscious, constant effort on our part.
Bob Ray's a guy who could publish in the an op-ed in the Globe and Mail probably most days that he would choose.
Right.
Why did he choose to publish with the Mark this time? Did you beg a favor? Did he come to you? How did it work?
What we offer someone like Bob Ray is we will publish what he says. Again, as long as it's not hateful and as long as it's coherent, regardless of how recently he's published on the Mark. He can have a running comment, or he can have a running commentary on our site.
Right.
The Globe, even Bob Ray, they'll only publish him at certain intervals because they can't be seen to be a Bob Ray. We're saying this is a living community.
Yeah.
Everyone who could write an op-ed at the Globe can come to the Mark and they can converse all day long.
So you avoided the question. The question was, did you go to him or did he come to you?
Well, we went to him.
Aha. And you said, hello, Bob. Would you like to be on Mark?
It's as if you were there.
But, I mean, to be fair, right, like, even if you solicited her to write for you,
Yeah.
that's not necessarily like an admission that, you're a lefty because you think that guy
No,
over
it
another
wasn't
guy.
the implication at all. It's just
But
how did it work?
Yeah,
Right? Because
I know.
normally people like him and Preston Manny are publishing on the op-ed page of the Globe every day. And so when you try and get these high caliber, prominent writers to write for you, are you going and fetching them, or are they fetching you?
They do occasionally come to us, but most of our contributors have been actively recruited by us.
It's only around a few months.
It's fascinating to get to know how it works. Maybe we'll just one or two more questions. Yeah, one and two. All right.
Can you ask what your funding strategy going forward? I only ask because, well, two reasons. One, you mentioned the lack of funding for writers, which would suggest that somewhat precludes you from being able to cultivate the kind of writer base that you may want for the Mark, and vice versa. How are you then cultivating the kind of base of readership that you want, and then funding-wise, are you intending to be charitable? Are you intending to fundraise? Do you have parameters for advertisers?
We are, as I said, privately funded currently, and we will continue to be privately funded, and eventually we'll make money on our own. We don't plan to ever pay our writers. We offer them a value proposition. These are people who are very successful in their own careers, who don't need the money the measly pay that we might be able to offer them. What they can use the Mark as is a platform, a promotional tool. And that's how we've secured the fairly impressive contributor base that we have secured. Now,
Does that make it journalism?
well, it's commentary. How is it different from an op-ed?
But do you think of the Mark as a journalistic platform?
No, I wouldn't say that. I would say it's commentary. I mean, I don't know how you would define the terms, but they're not reported. Generally, they can't be not generally. But yeah, so securing the contributor base hasn't been as much of a challenge as going into that contributor base and getting content that's exactly as we wanted so we can build the readership. And that is an ongoing challenge. I don't know if that answers it.
You think so?
I guess what you just said about the difference between an op-ed, or it's not much different from an op-ed, I was thinking blog-like. Like when you're talking about ongoing commentary from Bob Ray at all hours of the day and night, what's the difference, okay? If I go to his blog, you're just becoming the hostess of the party at that point, right?
Well, we do have editorial standards, and a substantive blog post, I don't see any categorical difference between a substantive blog post and an op-ed. I guess is my answer to that. So we only accept substantive contributions.
That actually wasn't my question,
Oh, sorry.
but I just thought I'd make that comment. My question is, do the essays that have gotten the most attention mentioned so far, they have, you mentioned the audio-video element at the beginning of your talk here. And I'm just curious, do those have any rolling banner or any video or audio element to it?
No, so far we haven't. We've just had a little bit of video content and no audio content. That's something that we're working towards. Yeah, but that will be a big part of what we do going forward. But right now we just don't have the capability.
Right. Well, I think one thing's for sure, the people in this room are probably going to be going home and checking out the Mark News tonight.
So click on the ads.
Click on the ads. Tonight's event was free, so click on the ads a bunch of times for them. Have your friends click on the ads. And I know that all of us are going to be really, well, we're appreciative of you coming to talk about, I think it's probably one of the first public occasions where you've been talking about the Mark to an interested audience like this, and that we're all going to be really interested to see how it evolves over the next couple of years of beta and beyond. So,
too.
Yeah. Thank you very, very much. Wraps up the summer series on democracy and journalism, but we're gonna be back in September and with an entire new roster for the autumn. I've got two fun announcements to make, though. It won't be our first speaker in our. Can I say this? I can say this, yeah? Yeah, because Greg is with Bruce Mao Design, and we're going to be doing a special mass talk in conjunction with BMD. We're figuring out capacity and how all of this is going to work. But stay tuned, because there's going to be some opportunity there around hearing both from Bruce Mao on social innovation, but also a very good friend of Mass, the founder of the Chaos Pilots, a school for business design and social innovation in Denmark that's done some amazing work over the course of the past 15 years. Youth is coming to Toronto. He's going to be spending September until Christmas as a fellow with Mass, and he's going to be part of that conversation as well. We're going to try and find a way to make sure that as many people get a chance to be a part of it as possible. And later that same month, Alan Weber, the co-founder, former editor of Harvard Business Review and co-founder of Fast Company magazine, he's going to be coming to town, and we're going to be doing a big talk with him. So there are things to look forward to. We're also going to be publishing two new monographs, publications this autumn, one about profiles in new political leadership, and the other one about the 150 year, which is a project that Mass and IPAC are spending a lot of time thinking about. Even though it seems like the sesquicentennial is a long ways away, it's actually lots of planning needs to begin now. So we've got a publication coming out about everything that we ought to know and maybe learn from 1967 and what it means in 2017. So look forward to seeing you in September. Feel free to mill about here and get another drink. I'm sure Laura would be happy to serve you. But thank you very much for coming out, and once again, thank you, Jordan.
Thanks.